Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. We are going to get started in just a minute here. There are still some folks logging in, and we'd like to give them a second. So we will kick this off in just about 1 minute. Thank you so much.
Christy, we're live. You got to have your elephant in just the right spot. Just the right spot.
Now you're getting in my head.
All right. Well, good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar brought to you by both Government Social Media and Archive Social, titled 2020's Crucial Conversations, Actionable Tips for Public Communicators. And I can assure you, you'll be walking out of today's webinar or exiting out of today's webinar with plenty of actionable tips. So in just a short moment, I'm going to be introducing our two presenters that you likely see on your screen already. But first, I wanted to do a quick review of some general housekeeping for you. So you may have noticed already, but there are several hundred of you in attendance for today's webinar. So you've been placed on mute as a courtesy. And today's webinar has been structured to accommodate a question and answer session towards the end of today's webinar. We've had quite a few questions submitted in advance. Good news is both Christy and Ray have had a chance to view those questions and incorporated some of them into the presentation materials. But you can also submit questions live during the webinar. You can just use the question function to submit your questions, and then following the main content portion as we move into our Q&A, we'll be able to address some of those questions, time permitting. I also want to let you know that you will receive a copy of today's webinar, a recording plus the slides, and we will publish a brief FAQ document detailing some of the questions that we've asked and answered. So just for joining today, you've ensured you're going to receive some of those valuable resources. So with those housekeeping rules set, why don't I go ahead and introduce today's speakers. So first, we are joined by Christy Dalton. Christy is the founder and CEO of Government Social Media. Many of you may refer to it as GSM. If you aren't familiar with Government Social Media, they are the nation's largest network of government social media professionals, and they are the go-to leading social media resource for all things social gov. Christy started off her career in government public information, one of the pioneers there and one of the earliest adopters of social media usage for government agencies. So Christy, we of course welcome and thank you. And Christy is joined today by Ray Carey. Ray is the CEO of Archive Social. Archive Social is the world's leading provider of social media archiving technology for the public sector. Archive Social currently serves more than 2,700 state, local government entities, law enforcement agencies in K-12 districts, including large metropolitan cities like New York, Chicago, Seattle, Detroit, Dallas, federal agencies, but also smaller communities, including coastal towns like Duck, North Carolina, with an off-season population of just under 400 residents. So runs the gamut of all sizes. So Ray, welcome to you as well, and thank you for being here today. And Ray, I'm actually going to start by turning things over to you and what Archive Social is currently seeing happening in the world of social gov, as it has been one interesting year.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I think interesting's well, one word for it. I really grapple in this environment with choosing words. It's certainly been a year at the local, national, and global level, seeing sort of events that I've never seen before. I think, frankly, the world has never seen before. And I don't really envy the folks, many of whom are on this call. I think I'm seeing this counter 339 and counting, who are our community communicators and have to choose the words and measure their words and communicate with citizens in our communities around what is happening with these sort of earth-shattering events, whether it be the pandemic and sort of racial inequality protests. So I don't envy the job that you folks have, What I do know, though, is that it's a great community that we get to work with, the community of communicators, if you will. And Christy, you run a community of communicators, and you were one, in fact, yourself. Long before social media was as dominant as it was today. Do you think the job's gotten more challenging, not just this year, but over time?
100%. Back in the day, the biggest challenge used to be getting buy-in for launching social media profiles. And now with the sophistication of social media and the prevalence of it, you almost have to be a First Amendment scholar, a graphic designer, a videographer, and wear all of these other hats. It's amazingly complex and a very, very skilled position, but it's really overwhelming right now.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of things that we've noted that are driving this this volume and intensity. Not just the geopolitical sort of climate and environment that's going on, but just time online is up right now. It has continued to go up. I have 2 teenagers, so I know all about that. One who I think is trying to reach the end of Netflix, but sort of fundamentally, we're living our lives more online. Phone usage is going up fundamentally, and then add on top of this social distancing, and it means you need an electronic means to stay connected, right? What once was a way to stay connected is really, for a lot of people, the only way to see connected. And we're also seeing, and I'll show you on the next slide, this massive growth in the archive, because people are looking to their public institutions for a trusted source of information. Right now, there is so much disinformation available on social media. People want to have a source, whether it's local or state or sort of national, that they can trust the information for. And largely, it's our public agency communicators that are that trusted source in what can be the wild west of the social media. And this is the archive. So Brian talked about, we have just under 3,000 agencies information in the archive, and it always continues to grow. But the last 100 days has been really asymptotic growth, and so this is 41% in 90 days, right? So just in the last 3 months, sort of massive growth. And so what once was a sort of nice to have an emerging form of communication, now it's largely the form of communication. I was on with a superintendent of schools the other day who said, I really don't like social media, but if I want to get to my parents, they don't answer their emails. I don't have all their phone numbers. If I'm not on Facebook, I cannot talk to my parents. And we have really important things as superintendents of schools to talk to our parents about, always, but in particular now. So this is driven by some big folks like the CDC is a customer. If you can imagine, the CDC's archive is sort of blowing up right now, is huge in terms of volume. But even small towns and agencies that typically just used it as a sort of a public information are now engaging more specifically on social media. And the second thing is, given the topics that we're discussing today, the intensity around the reactions and the comments is higher. So there's more in the overall archive, there's more posting, there's more comments, and frankly, more of those comments are at odds with one another, in general within the archive, more than we've ever seen before. Is this, sorry, I was looking for the next slide, but Christy, what are you seeing anecdotally? You work with a lot of these, a lot of these folks. What are you seeing in your one-on-one conversations with communicators?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. In the graph that you're showing us with the volume of content that you're archiving on social media, what we're hearing from public communicators and what we're seeing is a tremendous amount of comments. I would look at agencies' Facebook pages and posts before that would get anywhere from 2 to 10 comments is getting 200, 500 comments. We're dealing with a massive, massive amount of public sentiment and public input right now that public communicators have to figure out their best approach.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've always talked to our communicators about is increasing engagement. And in the last 90 days, that's really flipped over. I would say the end of last year, I was talking to some folks that communicate for large cities, and they're saying, how do we beat the algorithm, right? How do we get our posts to be watched? How do we get above the fold? Well, they're now the trusted source above the fold, and they're saying, how do I keep up with this volume? So it used to be, how do I get noticed? Now it's, how do I stay afloat? And we went out and surveyed over 600 of communicators. About half were our customers, half were not. So we wanted to make sure that we had a widespread group. And one of the things that we found is most people are one-person bands by and large. If you go down, right, but there's 32 teams in the NFL, they're NFL cities. So most of our cities, most of our municipalities in this country are relatively small. And if you look at the budget, it's one or two people handling now this sort of tsunami of increased communication. What are you seeing? You have, representatives that from really large organizations and federal agencies, but really down to, some small agencies and authorities that you work with. How are you seeing people handle this capacity?
Well, I don't want to characterize it as 100% overwhelmed, because this is a very sophisticated field, and we have a lot of people who are very well trained. They're at the top of their game, and they're doing a really, really good job under the circumstances. But the general sense is that, yes, many social gov teams are just a team of one. It's a person who probably doesn't have the only hat of being the social media professional, but they're the public communicator for their entire agency. And so they're all those things and above. And it's a tremendously difficult situation. And I look forward to sharing our actionable steps and advice with everyone.
Well, I think that's the time. We're 12 minutes in, so people are probably itching to, so what can we do about it, Christy?
What can we do about it? Well, I know I just said that, but I do want to take a step back and talk just for a minute about, I don't want to belabor the point with the context, but I think it's important that you have other folks that recognize the tremendous difficult situation that you're in. Last year at the Government Social Media Conference, I got on stage, and the concept that I talked about was how we're in this constant state of overwhelm, and it's not going to change. The underappreciation for the position and for the complexity and the skill involved in your role isn't going to change unless we teach leadership how to support us. And I saw several nods of agreement in the audience. Teach leadership how to support us. And I think that that concept remains true now more than ever. Throughout this conversation, we're going to give to you actionable advice and also talk about how to get the support that you need from leadership, because a lot of this isn't a problem that you can solve by yourself. You need support to be able to do that. And so with first talking about that, I wanted to just briefly acknowledge that many of you have been in crisis mode since March of this year. I don't think it is an overstatement to say that many of you have been in crisis mode almost all year, and it's not a great situation to be in. The two crises that we're talking about here today, coronavirus and racial tensions across the country, and civil unrest everywhere. And really, I think that these two crises are in a way uncomparable due to their nature. But the reason that we're mentioning them in the same breath here is because each one of these has a compounding effect to government communicators. And for many of you, this has been your worst year ever in so many different respects. And think about it, we also have public communicators who represent public health. We have public communicators who represent law enforcement. And we have public communicators who are also people of color. And you can imagine the tremendous, tremendous amount of stress collectively for this field right now. And I just want to take a step back to recognize that, because the position that you have is so different than all of your other Facebook friends who are commenting and weighing in. You represent a government agency, and you have all of these different things weighing into the mix. And many of you yourselves have been working from home or trying to deal with working from home with your family. We're still working from home, so I will be 100% surprised if this webinar goes through without an interruption by something. But you've been dealing with all these things. Some of you have dealt with a death of a family member during the coronavirus where you can't truly grieve. Some of you have friends who are doctors, friends, you're supporting your own agency and supporting law enforcement. It's very, very difficult. So for those communicators who are public communicators plus social media managers, it's an intense environment right now. And if one of your hats is managing social media, it can be absolutely overwhelming. You're seeing a dramatic increase in comments across the board. You're seeing the call for a need for community outreach due to the coronavirus, due to social unrest, due to the coronavirus again. And social media is directly folded into all of those things. And so many times we're getting those competing messages too. Competing messages might be what you need to communicate to the public. We're hearing that agencies are having a difficult time with being able to communicate to the public about wearing masks and communicating to the public where that ends with protests and what's allowed when you're talking about also instructing citizens that they can't assemble in groups larger than X, Y, and Z. Competing messages in terms of what you feel personally might be at odds with what you have to communicate on behalf of the government agency. And I just have to say, the rest of the social gov community is here with you, and we understand. We definitely understand. I want to talk a little bit more about dealing with this information overload. And I think that the first thing that you should do, an action step here, is to take a look at what do boundaries look like for you. Until you know what you're asking for, it's going to be very difficult for you to plan for it and to articulate that to leadership. So thinking about your boundaries and what that would be is extremely important first step. And that's going to allow you to be very clear in how you're asking leadership to support you. And I want to be very specific on this, because what we see as agencies and social media professionals who are in a state of overwhelm, and so they're telling their boss, I'm overwhelmed. There's too much. I can't do this and that and this and that other thing and monitor social media. I'm overwhelmed. And what I'd like to express to you that there's a big difference between saying, I'm overwhelmed to your leadership versus being very specific and saying, a mistake due to fatigue could be disastrous. It's crucial for me to schedule uninterrupted breaks. I need you to allow me to schedule these. It's much more powerful, much more. Or a statement like, you can support me right now by assigning a backup who will monitor social media in my absence for 10 hours a week, or whatever it might look like. The point is, be very concrete and very specific in your asks to leadership, because it's much easier to respond to that versus being able to respond to the general statement or expressing the feeling of I'm overwhelmed, because then they have to diagnose it, figure out what the best thing for you is, when you can probably better communicate what's better to your leadership.
I'd also, Christy, just I'd echo that in general in managing upwards, that if you don't create the solution, you're leaving it up to them to guess what will help you. If you're very specific, it might increase the chance you get the help that you're looking for.
Exactly. And it won't be that unintended help that they think is helpful, but isn't really, and it's adding you more responsibilities and more to your work. We've seen agencies handle transparency and handle criticism differently. And I would say that in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd by Minnesota police, we've seen agencies respond to social media criticism all across the board. And we get it. It's a very difficult situation for everyone involved. We've seen across the spectrum from the Walla Walla Police Department in Washington deactivating their social media accounts. Now, because of this and other incidents, we know that social media professionals are getting calls internally within their agency to maybe do the same. And we are hoping that our social media professionals can be the voice of talking about how it is definitely very difficult right now, but we need to leave our profiles up there. And I know that some of you are really tempted to take this action. And I think that this will be, it's a very important conversation to have, but also in this particular situation with Walla Walla Police Department, I encourage you to read about it. There's a lot wrapped up into the decision why they decided to do that and the specific calls that their agency was receiving and criticism from the public. But one thing that we have seen across the board, besides some outliers like that, is law enforcement agencies are in general across the country under intense criticism. And for the social media professional handling that profile, and keep in mind, this might not be someone who is a uniformed officer, it might be a civilian, it might be someone who manages the city or the county social media, and also another duty is assigned is handling law enforcement. We know that some of you are in that same situation. Many agencies across the board we're seeing are being proactive in publishing what their policing policies currently look like. And I wanted to share a specific example with you on the next slide, because
hey, Christy, just as we go off the subject of folks, deciding to turn down the dial or turn off their social media, I would say, from our perspective as being, public record folks and transparency folks, it's from a public records perspective, it's a good strategy. You create no records. From an engagement with your community perspective, it's a really difficult strategy, because what we have found is oftentimes if people turn down their social media presence, someone steps in the void. So your citizens are looking to a page that looks like the city of XYZ, and in fact, it's a private page, not subject to sort of oversight. And so if you're not putting it out there in the world, it doesn't mean that somebody's not representing your city, your town, your government, and your agency in your stead. So oftentimes we see when people are new and they're launching, they kind of have to take back their presence. And so the decision I think that people should grapple with is not, am I in social media or am I not? Is it me, or am I leaving it up to the sort of the forces of fate to see who steps in the void to create this communication? Because there's such a hunger from citizens for this information. Somebody's going to do it if collectively our community decides not to do it, is one thing we're seeing.
And I think the social media professionals, what you can use to phrase this to your leadership is that one, someone's going to fill the void. So we recommend strongly not shutting down social media profiles. And two, what is this going to look like? It's going to look like we couldn't handle the criticism. It's going to look like in the public sphere of judgment and in your community, it's going to look like that you're stepping back and maybe are a little bit less transparent. That it would be easier for handling the negativity, because it's not this cycle of negativity that is happening in your Facebook community, but there's also the other ramifications. And our hope is that the social media professionals will be the call of why we shouldn't do this. We have seen some agencies are taking the approach of being very comprehensive, and what that kind of looks like, I have an example up here, is that there's a personal message from leadership. And we've seen government agencies post a lot of different messages about what their departments stand for. And it really does help to personalize that message from leadership. It helps to humanize your agency. Also across the board, that comprehensive approach is also explaining current policies. What's the commitment to working with the community? And one thing I would encourage all law enforcement agencies to include on their websites and point people to this is over on the right here, you see to report misconduct. And that's something that we're seeing more common now, where any citizen can go in, very transparent, and report conduct that they can see. Of course, this is what the social media professional can help with. It's also, as someone in the digital space, your responsibility to also make sure that everything that people submit through these forms, if they're submitting feedback, they're reporting misconduct, that's getting to the right place it needs to be. No one wants to just be doing lip service, and we can't if we want to move forward. Another thought on transparency and handling criticism is that again, to your point on being proactive, and there will be less gaps for others to fill in with inaccurate information. And I love this tweet from Kaylee where she talks about the fact that you definitely want to be proactive so that there's less gaps to fill in, exactly speaking to what you just said, Ray. As well as we strongly recommend doing, and a lot of agencies are doing this, whatever crisis you're dealing with, is a rolling FAQ. And a rolling FAQ, I have a screenshot here of an FAQ from, actually this was the city of Mountain View. And many of you already do this, and COVID-19 isn't going anywhere from what we can see, and some of us are even working on kind of reclosing plans. This can be an important resource not only for the public you serve, which is what you would expect with the rolling FAQs, and on social media you point the public to on your website where you have these FAQs that you frequently update, but it's also really critical to anyone handling customer service who's working for your agency to be able to point them to the official approved messages. And what I'd recommend with your FAQs is, where we've seen this be really successful, is where with your FAQs, you actually kind of have three versions of them. One is the public version, official FAQs on your site. And another one is an internal version where you use it for staging. You're staging your FAQs. This is where you have the social media people, the comms people, marketing, everybody wordsmithing on your internal FAQs. Use Google Docs. Now's not the time to introduce new technology to everyone. And then a third version of your FAQs, or maybe just combined with a different internal document, but a third version of your FAQs is the version that you use that is approved, that you use it internally for your support staff in answering specific questions or follow-up questions. You're getting really granular in the FAQs that you don't want to be drowned out for whatever reason you want in the second stage of people asking you follow-up questions. This is really useful for 311 for customer service for those FAQs. I actually, on the next slide, I want to share with you kind of an upgraded version of the FAQs. The World Health Organization, they have their own version of an FAQ where they went a step further and combined it with shareable graphics. And I actually learned several things looking at the World Health Organization website. As well, shareable graphics, perfect for social media, and it is something that people can do something with it once they get to the FAQs, because it allows them to download and share and gives them permissions to do that. I think really at this point, I'd like to talk about community outreach, because that is almost the number one reason why people are leaning on social gov professionals right now and public communicators right now is, you're the person that manages social media. How can we have meaningful outreach with our community and get feedback and collaborate and use tools and this digital technology to do it? And I think I grabbed this tweet here from Natasha from the city of Las Vegas, because I love that she talks about making sure that the right people are seeing your social media messages. And I think that's really, really relevant, because your job as a reminder isn't to be a wall between your agency and the public and all of the everything that comes along with that, the nastiness, the awfulness, the legit questions, everything that's coming through. Your job isn't to be a wall so that leadership and management never ever sees that, but instead it's your job to let them know what's happening, but to interpret it in a way for them where they can A, understand what you're going through and what you're dealing with right now, but B, turn it into actionable results for them where they can take action to decide the next steps. So don't be the wall. Make sure, even if it's just a text to leadership, also don't assume, and before I get to the next point here, don't assume that your leadership or your management or even your boss remembers all the monthly great, beautiful reports and stats you normally share with them. They're not going to have any context for the numbers that you're throwing out. So it's really helpful for you to tell them percentages of increase. We dealt with X number of comments this month, just to give you a better idea. Here's what it normally looks like, because the numbers are just going to bounce right off of them. Now, some agencies are planning social media forums. And so I want you to keep this in mind, because I want you to consider the fact that your leadership and your management, maybe your boss, is probably going to come to you and say, we know we want to do a social media forum. Can you let us know what that would look like? And it's your job to take that big concept, social media forum, and figure out the best way that that would work for you and for the public you serve. There are probably a lot of variables to plan for. For instance, if you're fashioning it like a tweet along, there's many opportunities for it to get hijacked on Twitter and other messages to take over and be dominant and not to get the meaningful value that you want. Maybe what's right for your community is to have a closed Facebook group where no pretenses here. You can expect for there to probably be a lot of ugliness happen in there and a lot of negativity, but that might be a way where you can ensure that it doesn't get hijacked by others. You really have to take a look at your specific community and your leadership when they're asking for social media forums. They're not going to really know what it looks like, and it's your job to share with them what tools you think would be the most useful for your community. Also, this was a great one. This idea comes from Jessica Fisher. Accepting questions and comments from the public and posting for your administration to reply back. And I like, it adds a nice little spin on community outreach and then responding to that in a little bit more controlled way, but it allows you to also still have that humanized look for your agency and truth too. I kind of picture it like a version of mean tweets, except without the humor and with answers that no one wants. But you know, being real. But these are all really good ideas for meaningful community outreach, and your role as someone who is a public communicator who handles social media is for you to best present the ways and guide your leadership, because they're not going to know which methods are going to be the best for the outcome. We would be remiss not to talk about perspective and practicing self-care. And I say that understanding that it's very difficult to have a level of self-care that matches the gravity of what you're dealing with right now. You know, telling you to drink water and remember to breathe, while it's still useful and it's going to help take the edge off of some of the awfulness that you're dealing with, there are some deep issues that many of you are dealing with right now, and you're being subjected daily to so much negativity that I wanted to share with you some advice from a counseling therapist. There goes my dogs. Counseling therapist Christina. She recently coached several of our GSM community members, and now they have the chorus going.
Christy, I would say dogs also provide some good help in self-care at times.
They do. They do. And we don't get to choose if we have the quiet dogs that sit on your lap all cute for selfies and everything, or if you have the chorus going on out there. But yes, definitely very, very important for self-care. And I'm definitely going to remember to share that message with the community. But Julia, Christina, she's a counseling therapist, and some of the great takeaways that she has is to give your brain as much predictability and routine as you can. And that's where the moving your body for 30 minutes a day and drinking water and eating veggies comes into play, because your brain wants that predictability. She explains it much more eloquently than me, and she is a licensed therapist. But she also says, give yourself some more grace and give more grace to others. Everyone else is probably dealing with the worst years, the worst month of their lives as well. And she also says to, and this one's really hard for overachieving social media professionals and public communicators, is lower your expectations for yourself. You need to be in a space where you are okay with not being able to reply to everyone and not being able to handle everything and not being able to say yes to everything. She also talks, and I wanted to just mention briefly about the concept of micro joys. And micro joys is the idea of giving yourself something positive to look forward to each day, whether it be a podcast or 10 minutes of meditation or a hot bath or something like that. But these micro joys, they are meaningful, and if you can build them into your days, you can be in a better space. Just wanted to mention, check out juliachristina.com to learn more and to hear all of this more eloquently presented. And the last big concept that I wanted to talk about before talking about the real big importance of critical social media records right now is in thinking about practicing self-care, what are some other things that we can practically do besides mindfulness and these other things? And one thing that you can practically do is, because you represent a public sector agency, odds are more than likely you have access to an employee assistance program. And this might not even be something that you looked at before or thought you needed, but just consider it, because you might be able to talk to a counselor or a therapist for free through your work EAP. So inquire with your human resources and see if that's an option for you, because some of the difficulties that you're dealing with right now has the ability to manifest itself in other ways, and a therapist or a counselor can be very, very helpful for you. Also, we're getting a lot of advice from our community to snooze or unfollow your personal profile for your sanity. And typically we're talking about our Facebook profile. And I know that some of you have secondary Facebook profiles. Just wanted to give a reminder that it does violate Facebook's terms of service. And so they have the option, and many times they have shut down those other profiles. I know for other professionals, it's kind of a lifesaver. So a happy in between is to snooze or unfollow personal profiles that are giving you grief for your sanity. Also consider deleting social media apps from your phone. I say if possible, because I know that that's a big if possible. If you're expected to monitor social media 24/7 and you haven't drawn that boundary, it could be very, very difficult. If you do have the option, you might want to try it. We've heard great success. If you are a Chrome user, we're hearing some good things about the Newsfeed Burner extension. It blocks feeds from Facebook and from LinkedIn and from YouTube. And the one thing I hear that people like about it is that you don't have to go into the Chrome extension settings to kind of disable it, so you can actually do it. So you can actually see the new news feed. You can choose at any time to pause that service for 15 minutes. So you can give yourself 15 minutes of seeing these newsfeed items. But for your sanity, these are some practical steps that we're hearing from the community works. And so I definitely recommend that you consider trying them. And I'd love to hear more from our community about what you're going to use. Ray, I know that you have some perspective on how critical, and I can't stress this enough, social media public records are right now. And so I'm going to hand it back to you.
Great, thanks. I was going to ask Brian to go back to slide 18 for a minute, because Christy, I had one question that was sort of on my mind. One right here we go. You had a couple of these windows on the right-hand side of your slide that say replying to @government social media, and then they have really great answers to provoking questions. And I know many of the folks that are likely on here are members of GSMCon and the private Facebook group, but some may not be. So I thought as we're going through and we're tempting people with these great answers, can you tell them how they can get them on their own all the time?
Sure. Sorry about that. I should have given the context of why we have these great tweets. And we host a bi-weekly Twitter chat called the Government Social Media Chat, GSM Chat. If you go on Twitter, every Thursday, 1 o'clock Pacific time, 4 o'clock Eastern time, you can participate in our GSM chat. It is a community of everyone who handles social media for government agencies. And we have some, education, international, private sector as well that participate, but we change the topic every time. You tag your answer with GSM chat, it runs for an hour, and you can get tapped into the collective base of knowledge out there, challenges, opportunities with government social media. We've been running the chat since 2015, every other week.
Yeah. So I'd say both that and the Facebook group, there's a tremendous wealth of knowledge out there to tap into, and we'll probably have some links and things at the end of this, but it's an incredible resource for, if you have a really tactical question. My guess is you're not the first one, and there's likely a compatriot of yours that's in the group that has faced it. One of the things that we're all facing is that you guys are not just communicators, you are public agency communicators, and that job is different in many ways, but one fundamental way is that you are on the public record. I'm sure almost everybody on here knows that their communication is on behalf of the public agency, and as such is subject to public information laws. And what's interesting about public information laws is they were largely written in the 70s, but they were written to talk about what's in the communication, what is in the content, not the vehicle. So whether it's a letter, whether it's carrier pigeon, whether it's an email, or whether it's in social media, if it's a record, it's a record. So it's not about the form, it's about the fundamental sort of content of the record. And so we're creating these records at a massive, sort of at a massive volume. And these records can be requested and subpoenaed, and whether it's a FOIA law or right to know or sunshine laws, we're creating records that can then later need to be recalled. In this same survey, when we went out to over 600 folks, we asked the question is, have you gotten records requests? And given that we all collectively work, this community works at public agencies, the answer was a resounding yes. So 74.9%, you guys will see on the slides, folks have received a records request for their agencies, their communities, their cities or towns information. And 1 out of 4 of those specifically said, and we want information from your social media, from your Facebook page, from your Instagram, sort of from Twitter. In reality, it's likely that a lot of those requests are even more than 1 in 4. Oftentimes the request comes in for all communications about this subject. And that includes everything that was said in a differential way that is unique comment fundamentally on that particular subject in any way sort of possible. So this is an important thing to keep in the back of your mind as you're trying to do this admirable and difficult job of communicating on these difficult times. People are going to look back on these times and say, what is it that that my elected officials, that my public agencies said about these issues in these times? So, we are fundamentally on the record here. Next slide. And there's one thing about social media. So if social media is on the record, it presents a little pickle that is different than email or phone or text, or I guess probably no one doing carrier pigeon, is that there's a difference in the chain of custody. If I, Christy, send you an email and you send it back to me, who has it at what time and who has the unalterable copy of that is very easy to track. But in social media, it is fundamentally intertwined like a strand of DNA between the publisher and the commenter. And sometimes the publisher is the social media agency, right? Is the fundamental government producer of content, and the comments come from citizens. Sometimes it's a question of a citizen, and it's a reply by the city. And you say, well, that's okay, it's all on the record. The issue is the citizen has control over their content, and anything that is nested under their content, they have control over. So if they delete their post, if they go in and delete their Facebook or Instagram account, everything underneath that goes away forever. And so fundamentally, the chain of custody around social media is a shared chain of custody between the public and the public agency. But the responsibility for the record is squarely in your lap, right? And that's the fundamental sort of pickle that makes social media communications different than other electronics forms of communication when it comes to public records and public record retention. The question you might ask is, well, does that happen a lot? And so I'm a numbers guy, so we did a study. We always just go ahead and do a study. So we took about 55 million social media records in 2019. So we had everybody that we had in 20, that we had an entire record for them in 2019. And we compared the archive at the end of the year to the beginning of the year and did a delta analysis. And I am so glad that we have big data scientists, because when I say we, I don't mean me. We had data scientists in there doing this. And the punchline here is that 1 out of 12 records is altered or deleted a year later. So the idea that you can go back to Facebook, that you can go back to Instagram, that you can go back to Twitter, and you can see what actually happened when that FOIA request comes in, 1 out of 12 times, it's not there. Sort of fundamental.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, and it says so on the slide if we're catching up. No, there it is, 1 out of 12. There you go. Good thing I remembered. But yeah, so this, and we have seen this continue to increase. By the way, that was 1 out of 15 when we did our study in 2019 on the 18 data, because we have to have a year of data. So it was 1 out of 15. And then we did it recently on the 2019 data, and it's 1 in 12. And that's not even picking up this newer volume. So I'm real interested, once we have a year worth of data that includes, this data set, is that sort of fundamentally Facebook is not the permanent record. They are built for 3 billion private citizens. It gets used by public agencies, and there's a fundamental gap there. It's a very, very powerful tool, but there is a gap in how they are not built for our use. They are built for the private citizens' use, and we have to do some manipulation to make it a tool that is that meets all of our sort of collective needs. So what can you do about it? So you're having this this incredibly difficult job, both from a time perspective, from an emotionality perspective, from a measuring your words perspective, and you're subject to public records law. How can you make some sense of that? And there's 3 basic steps that we talk to people about doing. Number 1, have a firm and published policy. This is how we do it. I think this is akin to some of the boundaries that Christy is talking about it. We don't delete, we do delete. We hide under these circumstances. These are the people that can post, and these are the people that can't post. This is the expectation around responsive time. We respond 24 hours a day, or only during business hours, within 4 hours, or on a best efforts basis. Set up those collective, not just boundaries for you as a person, but as social media policy, so you can set the expectations for the general public that you're out there communicating to. What should they expect to you? What is inside those boundaries? What is outside those boundaries? So that you can sort of rely on that. The next is to get a moderation guide. So tone is critically important. There's some questions sent in around when to use humor, when not to use humor. I don't know that I have all the answers to those questions, but I know having a guide to the tone, your voice, who can respond, how quickly the responses go out, what type of content is in there, what do you think is inappropriate and irrelevant, and having some examples. So think of it as a policy and a practice. And if you have a policy and a practice and some basic rules and guidelines, you're not trying to figure out the answer on every single one post. There is too much volume and too much complexity to try to figure these things out one post at a time. I will tell you, if you need help getting right inside. Oh, sorry, there goes my notifications that I didn't pause, Christy. Thank you for the suggestion earlier. Whether it's from us or from GSMCon, there are examples. If you go out to the community, you can get policies. These are published. We're happy to help you do that. Get a good policy, get a good moderation guide, and then get a strategy to retain your social media records. If you do those three things, it won't make your job around choosing the right language any easier, but it can give you a degree of protection and a degree of comfort in that you're doing your job from a public records law and a reproducibility and a freedom of information and First Amendment perspective in the correct way. So, we'll get to Q&A. So we're going to switch over now to Q&A. I think that's the next slide. But as we do that, we're going to ask you guys a couple of questions. So there's a poll that's going to pop up as I'm going to turn it back over to Brian. He's going to ask, we have some pre-submitted questions, so thank you. I believe that people can chat their questions in, and Brian will read them. But we'd invite you guys to answer this poll and answer some of our questions. So if you'd like to learn more about public records and social media archiving, you can click that. Anything about sort of compliance laws or legal trends, we are seeing a dramatic change, and we have a group that can talk to you just about what's going on legally in your particular state. If you want to learn about GSMCon, the professional association, the resources that are available, how you get to those ready-made answers in a group that are there, or all of the above. So feel free to click one of these. And Brian, I think I turn it over to you, and Christy and I can field some questions.
You got it, Ray. Thanks. And in the interest of time, I'm going to dive right in. I will remind folks, though, that are on the webinar, you will get a copy of the recording as well as the slides. These poll questions are just if you want incremental information outside of that. So Christy or Ray, maybe Christy, we'll start with you. First question that was submitted in advance of attending the webinar are some quick tips to handle the negative comments that are happening on social media. In particular, this person inquired about Facebook, but negative comments can happen on both Facebook and Twitter.
Okay, thanks. I'll jump in on that one. I'm still seeing the quick poll on my screen, but I am just going to continue through. And actually, if you would allow me a little latitude here, I'm actually going to take this opportunity in talking about handling negative comments and give a hat tip to everybody who's participating live on social media right now, who's tweeting about this webinar. This is awesome. And I just wanted to give a nod to Jess Brown, who tweets, if you're not using social to connect with your community and build relationships, why are you using social media? Painful that we're still making this point, and everybody who's weighing in on that one. And she's absolutely right. And even though we're faced with negative comments right now, there's a reason why we're on social media, and handling negative comments is very, very difficult. But I would say there's a few different ways that you take a look at it. And one is, as Ray was talking about, hold it up to your policy. Two, I'd say that normally you'd assess your negative comments on a scale of, does this need response? And you take a look at it and look at it in terms of, is this purely designed to trigger us and to incite us and to those ends? Or is this wrapped up in negativity, but there's actually a comment in here that I can answer, and it will be helpful for the community if I do answer it. Normally, I'd say you'd assess the comments on that kind of scale to figure out whether or not you would respond. But I recognize that right now, you might even be in a state where you cannot monitor all of the comments. And that is so true for so many different agencies. I think that what is important is that you have an obligation to communicate to your agency what you're seeing on social media. And that doesn't have to be a screenshot of every single post. That's not manageable, but you have an obligation to share what you're hearing on social media and not be that wall to get through to it. So normally I would say you'd assess it on a scale whether or not it needs a response. Just understand all across the board, there's a lot of negativity, and you personally, as the person who's monitoring social media for your agency, it's not your fault, and you can only do what you can do.
Yeah, I think, Christy, that's great. I have a couple just sort of comments. Number one, look at that policy. Generally, the policies say don't delete it. You can make the situation potentially worse. There are some circumstances, depending on the network that it's in and how your policy is written, where you could hide it. And so there's some policies and practices around that. The third thing, if whoever sent this in ahead of time is on, if you want to send us an email, Brian can tell you where to make sure it's responsive. We had a great webinar, I don't know, about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Brian can remember who put it on. I was out that day, but it was on trolls and how to handle trolls. And so, the number one advice there was don't feed the troll. So you don't have to engage in every negative comment, but there's an hour on specifically tips and tricks to handle, some of the really difficult negative feedback that comes in. And we'd be happy to forward that, that presentation onto this questionnaire, or frankly, anybody else who's interested in that recording and those slides.
Thanks
That's
for
right,
mentioning
Ray.
that. There were a lot of great resources on that webinar. And side note, I'm a big proponent for actually not hiding comments on Facebook. And I know that there's definitely arguments for and against in my view. And just so everyone else knows, when you hide a comment, that person isn't aware that you hid it, and other people who are friends with that person can continue the conversation. And I'm just concerned about what that means for your agency moving forward. But right there with you on looking at your policy. And at the end of the day, your policy has to be sound. So please, please, please bring it through your legal counsel and ensure that if you are going to delete, that you get their eyes on it and their approval with it as well.
So we had quite a few questions on this deletion and moderation of comments. So Ray, the webinar you were referring to was hosted by Brandy Bates. She's the PIO of Santa Rosa County in Florida. Trolls and their toll on social media communicators. The resources on our website, but of course, you can request it simply by going to archivesocial.com and requesting information from our website. We also got a string of questions around how to introduce personality or fun back into their posts. Pre-COVID, people may have had a certain tonality or personality to their posts, and they had to back away from that, considering how serious the news and information they were posting. So some questions around how do we, or when should we, introduce back fun, humorous, shareable content? So Ray or Christy, whichever one of you wants to start first on the when and how to introduce back some fun into the social media posts for our agency communicators.
Christy,
That's a good one.
I'll let you get that one.
That's a good one. And we hear that question from a lot of the folks in our network. And humor is always as you know, a very delicate balance with government communicators. And if you'd have asked me this question a week ago, I would have said definitely too early, and maybe even this week as well. But I really think that it boils down to your current tone, what you're known for, as well as your community. You know your community best, and you know what's going to resonate with them best. But you got to make sure that your humor doesn't impede on important messages, and you have to ask yourself, why am I using humor? What is this getting me right now? Is it important? You certainly don't want to joke about anything that is completely inappropriate, but using humor is important on a blue sky day for showing the humanizing your agency. That said, I have over the past couple of days come across responses to regular benign social media posts where the public that the page serves is being more lighthearted in the comments. And I've seen the government agency joke around in humor as they could kind of banter back and forth on nothing related to the important issues at hand right now. So I will say that with the caveat of I've seen it work in some situations. At the end of the day, if you're going to reintroduce humor before posting anything, run it by a few peers, several peers prior to posting. Humor is very, very subjective, and you want to make sure that it comes across in the right way, and also ask yourself, why am I using this right now? What am I getting out of it?
That's the question I would ask. I'm probably the wrong guy to answer this because we're in the compliance software business, which isn't like super funny, Christy. So it's I'd like to think we're lighthearted and have fun, but our job really is to help protect public agencies. And so the protection part of me says, wait, sort of fundamentally, that remember everything you're doing is public. With a degree of hindsight, sometimes things look a little bit different. Humor is often used as a tool for engagement and as a way to make sure that you're connecting directly with people and that you're seeing your posts are being seen and consumed and you're spreading information. Right now, the engagement levels are high because the topics are really high. So I don't know that you need humor for engagement right now. Now, you might just need it for your own mental sanity, but the compliance part of me says I'd lean back a little bit, continue to lean back a little bit on the humor right now, just because I don't know, I'm not a really funny guy and I may get it wrong. So if you're really good at it, maybe, but if you have any degree of question, I would say, let's make sure we're getting the right critical, important information out there. Your information is being seen and engaged with right now, and that's the fundamental role of the communicator. You guys are have very serious jobs. You're not necessarily entertainers, but that's the compliance part of me who wants to keep our agencies on the straight and narrow.
Well, guys, we are at the top of the hour. There were a tremendous amount of questions submitted around this whole topic, again, about blocking, moderating, clarifying misinformation. I'll do a quick plug that next month we are actually hosting a webinar on comment moderation and topic moderation. So hopefully we can pick up some of those questions in that content. But what I'm going to ask is, we have a couple members of our marketing team on here. We're going to collect the questions, put them into themes, and then give us a few days, but we will send out the thoughts from both Christy and Ray on some of these other questions versus tie people up beyond the hour we asked them to commit to us today. So Ray and Christy, I'm going to wrap the Q&A at this point, but then just simply ask if there's any closing thoughts before we say thank you and goodbye to the few hundred folks who stayed with us this entire hour.
I'll just go quick. It's just a giant thank you. The jobs that our communicators do are critical jobs for us to be kind of the free and open society that we are. And so there's nothing more serious than free and open dialogue. And right now, what goes on in government social media is in the center pin of what makes this, I think, a great country, despite what's all going on. So thank you for the job that you do and your piece in creating that sphere of open dialogue.
And I have to be quick on that because the musical dogs have returned. But I definitely echo that sentiment. Thank you for everything that you do. You mean so much to so many people. You are doing important work that couldn't be done without you. Thank you, and you're not alone. The community is here for you, and please reach out and talk to your fellow social gov communicators. They are more than willing to help. This isn't private industry and government and public sector. They'll share everything with you, so take them for that, and thank you very much.
Well, awesome. On the screen right now are a couple additional resources. Of course, the Archive Social website is a wealth of information as it relates to record compliance. And Christy, your Twitter feeds, but also your GSM Facebook group, you talk about the power of community and the willingness of people to share their expertise. It is alive and well on social media, especially if you're looking for a little positivity when the world just feels like it's beating you down and you're one of those one-man armies. Turn to your universe of friends on the GSM Facebook page. And Christy, you also posted some diversity resources as well for government communicators. So thank you for that. I know we ran a couple minutes over, but thank you so much for those of you who attended. We will make sure you get a copy of the webinar, slides, a recording, and shortly thereafter, we'll send out a list of some of the questions we were unable to get to with our thoughts. So I hope you guys have a wonderful and safe day, and thank you.